You are crouching in the dirt, the smell of dry rot and ancient dust filling your lungs. It's dark down here, the kind of heavy and suffocating darkness that collects beneath the floorboards of abandoned houses where things go to be forgotten. Your hand brushes against something that doesn't belong amongst the debris and the cobwebs. It feels like wood, but the texture is wrong, too smooth and deliberate. You strike a match, and the sudden flare of light reveals a face staring back at you. It isn't a child's toy. The brow is heavy, the nose hooked and prominent, and the expression frozen in eternal discomfort. But it's the eyes that stop your heart. They are glass, yet they seem to possess a depth that glass should not hold, reflecting the flame in your hand with a predatory intelligence. And as the match burns down to your fingertips, you realize, with a cold drop in your stomach, that you're no longer alone in the crawl space, and that this object has been waiting, patient and silent, for you to arrive. This is the sensation of discovery. The precise moment where curiosity curdles into regret, a feeling well known to the man who first pulled Letta from the shadows. In 1972, Kerry Walton was a young man exploring the abandoned derelict homes of Wagga Wagga, a town in New South Wales, Australia. He had returned to his hometown for his grandmother's funeral, a time already marked by grief and reflection, when he decided to revisit a specific, crumbling house that had haunted his childhood. Reports suggest this wasn't just idle curiosity. The property had a reputation in the neighborhood, the kind of place local children dared each other to approach but never enter. Walton, driven by a mix of nostalgia and bravery, ventured onto the property and eventually found himself drawn to the darkness beneath the veranda. It was there, half buried in the loose soil and discarded lumber, that he saw the figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a marionette, discarded and left to rot. But as Walton pulled the figure free from the earth, the weight of the object surprised him. It was heavy, substantial, and carved with an unnerving level of detail. The doll, which would later become known to the world as Letta, was roughly the size of a small child, with articulated limbs and a face that seemed less like a caricature and more like a death mask. Most people would have left it there. They would have seen the grim visage and the peeling paint and recoiled, sensing the bad luck that clings to such objects like a scent. But Walton felt an irrational urge to take the thing with him. It wasn't a desire born of affection. It was a command. He brushed the dirt from its face, placed it in the trunk of his car, and began the drive back to his home in Queensland. It was during this long and solitary drive that the first cracks in reality began to appear. According to Walton's later accounts, the journey was plagued by a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. He reported hearing sounds from the back of the vehicle, not the wind, and not the engine, but the distinct, rhythmic sound of movement. It started as a shifting of weight, followed by a frantic scratching, like fingernails or wood scraping against the confines of the trunk. It sounded unmistakably like something trying to claw its way out of the bag, a physical struggle happening just inches behind his seat. He found himself checking the rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see the wooden face rising up from the back seat, even though he knew it was locked in the trunk. The fear was irrational, yet entirely physical. This was not merely a souvenir. It was an introduction to a haunting. By the time he arrived home, the atmosphere around the doll had shifted from curiosity to a palpable oppression. He brought it inside, crossing a threshold that many paranormal researchers believe should have remained closed. The house, once a sanctuary, now housed a guest that refused to be passive. The discovery phase was over, and the domestic nightmare was about to begin. Living with the doll proved to be an exercise in psychological endurance. Kerry Walton and his brother, who shared the home, began to notice subtle but disturbing alterations to their environment. The first tangible sign that something was wrong appeared on the floorboards. In the mornings, they found strange scuff marks etched into the polished wood. These weren't random scratches. They were distinct lines, erratic and frantic, centering around the chair where the doll was seated. It looked as though something with hard wooden heels had been pacing the room in the dead of night, walking back and forth in a state of agitation. The atmosphere in the house grew heavy, not as a sudden chill, but as a constant sense of being watched. Friends who visited the house would report feeling nauseous or overwhelmed by a sudden wave of sadness when they entered the room where the doll resided. The family dogs refused to go near the object. They would snarl at the wooden figure, their hackles raised, or simply cower and whine, retreating to the furthest corners of the house to escape its gaze. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this period was the doll's apparent autonomy. Walton has stated in numerous interviews that he would leave the doll in a specific position, arms crossed, head facing the window, only to return hours later and find the head rotated, the glass eyes fixed on the doorway where he had just entered. It wasn't the dramatic movement of a Hollywood film. It was subtle, intimate, and deeply violating. It suggested that the object was aware of its surroundings, that it was tracking the movements of the living. Children were particularly susceptible to this influence. The most chilling account involves Walton's own children. One night, they woke up in a state of absolute hysteria, terrifying the household. They weren't just suffering from a nightmare, they were responding to a voice. They screamed that the doll was talking to them, repeating a phrase that no piece of wood should know. They screamed that the doll was saying, "Letta me out." This phrase, "Letta me out," became the cornerstone of the legend. Walton himself claimed that in moments of quiet, usually just as sleep was overtaking him, he would hear the same plea echoing in the architecture of the house, a screaming, desperate request to be released. And so, the doll was named Letta. It was a name born not of affection, but of a plea for liberation. When Walton finally sought answers from experts, the findings were disturbing. He took Letta to the Australian Museum in Sydney, hoping for a rational explanation, that it was a Victorian toy, a theater prop, something explainable. The experts dismantled that hope. They analyzed the wood, the paint, and the nails, and concluded that the doll was approximately 200 years old. It likely originated from Eastern Europe, with craftsmanship pointing toward Romanian or Romani heritage. The construction itself is an anomaly. The head is not a solid block of wood, it's hollow, creating a brain bucket inside the skull. This detail alone suggests a purpose beyond entertainment. In many occult traditions, hollow spaces in effigies are designed to hold ritual offerings, or to serve as a vessel for something else. Beneath the shoes, analysts found wooden pegs acting as nails, a detail that further cemented the doll's age and specific cultural origin. But the most visceral detail, the one that makes visitors recoil, is the hair. Under microscopic analysis, the hair glued to Letta's scalp was confirmed to be real human hair. The strands are thick, dark, and organic. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it was not uncommon to use human hair in memorial objects, but to find it on a marionette of this size suggests a deeply personal, perhaps ritualistic connection to a living person. The eyes, made of glass, sit deep in the sockets. Researchers noted that the pupils seem to possess a depth that glass shouldn't have. When photographed, the eyes often flare or change color, and people standing in front of the doll report a physical sensation of being scanned. The experts at the museum were accustomed to handling artifacts of death and ritual, yet many reported feeling nauseous in Letta's presence. The doll seemed to emit a field of hostility, a slow, invisible decay that affected everyone who came close. Science had provided a date and a material analysis, but it had failed to explain the dread. So, Kerry Walton turned to the spiritual. He arranged a seance, inviting a medium to sit with the doll and attempt to communicate with the intelligence attached to it. The medium knew nothing of the doll's history, yet as soon as the session began, she was overwhelmed by the sensation of water. The story that emerged from the dark is one interpretation, a tragedy that reframes the horror into something heartbreaking. The medium claimed that the spirit inhabiting the doll is that of a young boy who drowned 200 years ago. The doll was commissioned or created by the boy's father, a puppet maker, who was consumed by a grief so profound it bordered on madness. In this version of events, the hollow skull was not meant for black magic, but to hold the soul of the lost son. The human hair belonged to the boy. The father, unable to accept the finality of death, built a new body for his child. A body that would never rot, never drown, and never leave him. He poured his sorrow and his love into the wood, acting as a conduit to bind the confused spirit to the effigy. If the interpretation is true, the phrase, "Letta me out," becomes far more disturbing. It's not a demon trying to escape hell. It's a confused and traumatized child trapped in a wooden cage, unable to move or breathe, suspended in a state of eternal paralysis. The scratching in the trunk, the pacing on the floorboards, these are the actions of a restless, claustrophobic spirit seeking a way out of the darkness. As word of Letta spread, the media descended. But the doll proved to be a difficult subject. When Walton took Letta to television studios for interviews, the chaos followed them. A pattern quickly emerged. Studio lights, heavy industrial bulbs designed to last for thousands of hours, would explode overhead as soon as the doll was unboxed. Cameras jammed or suffered inexplicable digital failures. In one widely reported instance, an interviewer sat across from the doll, preparing to ask Walton a question. Before she could speak, she froze. Her hands flew to her throat, and she began to gasp for air, her face turning red. She later reported feeling invisible hands tightening around her neck, a pressure that was cold and distinct. The interview was cut short. And then, there is the rain. Walton has stated, and observers have noted, that when Letta is taken outside his case and exposed to the open air, the weather turns. Clear skies darken and rain begins to fall. It ties back to the origin story, the drowned boy, the water that took his life, following him through the centuries like a curse. It's as if the element that killed him is eternally drawn to his presence. People who view the doll in person often react with extreme physical symptoms. There have been reports of women fainting within seconds of making eye contact with the glass eyes. Strong men have broken down weeping for no apparent reason, overcome by a wave of crushing sadness that doesn't belong to them. It's an emotional contagion, a projection of the grief that was carved into the wood 2 centuries ago. You might be asking the obvious question, why keep it? If you had an object in your home that terrified your dogs, exploded your lights, and whispered in the dark, wouldn't you destroy it? Wouldn't you throw it into a fire and watch it burn until there was nothing left but ash? Kerry Walton has asked himself this question 1,000 times. He has admitted to driving Letta out to the bush, intending to leave him there, only to find himself unable to do it. He describes a feeling of paralysis, a psychological block that prevents him from abandoning the doll. There's a theory that the bond is symbiotic. The spirit needs Walton to exist in the modern world, to be carried, to be seen. And Walton, perhaps, has become the guardian of this lost soul. He speaks of the doll not as a monster, but as a responsibility. He has said, "I don't own him, he owns me." There is also the fear of the alternative. If the medium is right, and there is a soul trapped in that hollow skull, what happens if the vessel is destroyed? Does the spirit move on to another container? Or is it released into the house, angry, confused, and no longer confined to a small wooden body? Burning the doll might not end the haunting, it might liberate it. It might take a contained problem and turn it into a pervasive, formless nightmare. Today, Letta sits in a custom-built glass case in Warwick, Queensland. He is a celebrity of the macabre, a relic that people pay to see. But the glass does not stop the feeling. When you stand in front of him, you are not looking at an inanimate object, you are looking at a vessel. The wood has grayed with age, the velvet clothes are tattered, but the eyes remain bright, watching the world change around them. He has survived wars, he has survived being buried in the dirt of Wagga Wagga, and he has survived the curiosity of the modern world. So tonight, when you turn off your lights and your house settles into the quiet of the early morning, listen closely. Listen past the humming of the refrigerator and the wind outside. Listen for the sound of small wooden heels pacing on the floorboards. Listen for the scratching of fingernails against wood. We like to think that the things we lose are gone forever, that the dead stay dead, and the toys are just toys. But Letta is proof that sometimes things get left behind. Sometimes, love and grief are strong enough to cheat death, but the price is a kind of eternal prison. He is still waiting and watching, and somewhere in the dark, he is still asking to be let out.